Welcome everybody to our Supercharge Your Aging Journey webinar. My name is Dr. Susan Vandermorris, and I am here, with Dr. Nazreen Khatri and Sylvia Davidson, and we're here to talk about brain health. I will give a brief overview of what we can talk about today, and we'll save most of the time for questions. And our goal is really to have a discussion and answer questions informed by the most up-to-date research-backed information on brain health. So again, we'll start with a big picture of what we mean when we talk about brain health, and then we'll go into questions. Now, when we get to questions, we'll invite you to just type your questions in on the sidebar down the side of your screen, and we have a team here who's receiving your questions and will pass them forward to us. Okay, so here we are, supercharging your aging journey. First, I was told I have to have some disclaimer in here, which is to say that the information we're about to present is for educational purposes only. It is not medical advice. We're not here to diagnose you or replace your healthcare professional in any way. Leave that up on the moment so you can read it through. We are not your doctor. Talk to your doctor before you make any health changes. Okay, so first and foremost, what I wanted to do when I was asked to give this presentation was just open up with some widely accepted definition of what is brain health. And I went to Dr. Google and I looked at my resources on my shelf, and I really couldn't find anything that gave a nice, widely agreed upon definition of what we mean when we say brain health. So, you know, the questions are things like, is brain health something we can see on a brain scan? Is it something we find out on a memory test? Or is it something we can just ask each other, you know, how's your brain health today? It turns out not a lot of, there hasn't been a lot of agreement on what we mean when we talk about brain health. And I think that's for very good reason. Our brains are incredibly complex organs. They host our sensations, feelings, thoughts, behaviors, and they grow and change constantly over the lifespan. So as I was trying to think about how to set the stage for this discussion, I looked to a definition of health from the World Health Organization. It's been around for over 50 years. And that definition of health is that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So if we think about how we might apply that different definition to brain health, it gives us a framework for the kinds of things we might be looking at and the kind of things you might be looking at if you're looking to optimize your brain health. So we know that there are many changes in our bodies as we get older. There are changes to the brain as well. So within the physical domain, there are normal age-related changes in brain health, and there are diseases that are more common as we get older that can impact the brain. It's also a huge role for your overall health and lifestyle to influence your physical brain health. We think about mental components of brain health. Many people think first about memory and thinking changes. Some degree of memory change is a normal part of aging, and again, there are some conditions that impact memory more significantly. Mood is a big part of our brain health as we get older, and stress and how we cope with it has a big influence on our overall brain health. And then the last domain is the social domain. And here we're thinking about things like activity, engagement, what we do and how we connect with others, how we find meaning and purpose in life. These things, of course, have a major role to play in our brain health. So I'm just going to look at a couple of these factors in turn, just to set up some of the kinds of things that we might be able to answer your questions around. First, I'll just touch on dementia. A lot of times when people talk about brain health, they're asking questions around dementia and how to avoid dementia specifically, or how to live a healthy life with dementia. The first thing I want to say is that dementia is not a normal part of aging. It is not the case that all of us are eventually on a road to dementia. The image here shows the difference between a healthy aging brain and the brain of a person with severe Alzheimer's disease. They are distinct realities, and it's not a normal part of aging. The complicating factor is, of course, that advancing age is the largest risk factor for dementia. So as we get older, our risk of developing dementia does increase. Now that said, there are other things that increase or decrease risk for dementia. And about a third of the sort of overall risk of dementia relates to factors that can be controlled, can be managed, can be addressed. So if we're looking to avoid or prevent or reduce risk of dementia, these are the things that you can do today. These are the things that the evidence would say will help reduce dementia risk. That means addressing things like hearing loss, smoking, depression, physical inactivity, hypertension, social isolation, diabetes, and obesity. So these are things we know increase risk for dementia, and addressing these can bring the risk down. Turning our attention to memory more broadly, memory change is a normal part of aging. Some parts of memory get better and better as we get older, some stay the same, and some do naturally decline with age. For some, memory change can be a source of worry or a source of frustration. And that's true of any age, but as we get older and we become more aware of diseases that may impact memory, a lot of times there's a lot of undue stress around memory change that can be addressed. And so learning about what's normal and what's not, sharing with your peers, and using strategies to remember what you need to remember can make a big difference there. If we think about mood, some high-level points. Number one, depression is not a normal part of aging. It's a common myth, just like many people think that dementia may be a normal part of aging. Neither dementia nor depression are normal parts of aging. So studies show that the majority of older adults feel satisfied with their lives, even in the presence of major physical problems. So if you're thinking about what to do with that information, we know that being active, being social, being curious can boost mood and prevent depression. And in the presence of a mental health problem, it's important to know that most mental health problems are treatable. And so if you're concerned about your mood, talking to your primary health care provider is an important first step to moving forward. The last thing I'll touch on before we open up to questions is around engagement. And when I say engagement, I mean this incredibly broadly. I mean social engagement, being with others. I mean cognitive engagement, doing things that are interesting and challenging for you. The number one myth on this point is around crossword puzzles. So I will state definitively here that crossword puzzles are not required for brain health. What the research would suggest is virtually anything that you enjoy that challenges the mind, challenges the body, involves others, and or reduces stress can support your brain health. So research shows improvements to overall well-being, physical health, morale, and mood, and social connectedness. And these things, of course, all feed into this broader notion of what we think of as brain health. So bottom line is this: there is a lot you can do to optimize your brain health, and this little picture summarizes this well for me. First and foremost, we know that what is good for your heart physically is good for your brain. So this includes looking after your physical heart health, especially if you've had cardiac conditions or events, but also just the nuts and bolts of what you've grown up with, regular exercise, managing stress, getting good sleep, that kind of thing. The other thing that I think this picture conveys is that your emotional health and your well-being, your relationship with others, your sense of meaning and purpose. To me, those are captured nicely in that little heart diagram. So looking after those aspects of your well-being are also very important for your brain health. The other thing I like about this picture is that this brain is very active. He or she, walking with a sense of purpose and control. And that's the message that I hope you take home, that we hope you take home today, that there is a lot you can do to optimize your brain health. Okay, So I will stop there and we will open up for questions. Where would you like us to be? So just to reintroduce us, this is Nazarene Patry, I'm Susan Vandermorris, and this is Sylvia Davidson. I guess I'll read out the first question that was handed to me. The question is, my spouse was diagnosed with dementia. How can we make the most of our remaining time together while their memory is still intact?
Okay, I'm going to start, and we're going to be a little bit informal about this. First off, I love the fact that the question has been framed around how do we make the most of this, because as an occupational therapist who's worked in dementia care for a very long time, one of the things that I still struggle with is the amount of stigma that seems to be attached to getting a diagnosis like this. It often delays people seeking the help that they need because they're worried about what's to come. And the reality is, as Sue has said, we don't know exactly what's to come. The brain is a very complicated part of our body, and it has so much to do with everything that allows us to function in our daily lives. But really, starting today, one small thing that I would say is that you really need to start talking about what's going to be important and what's going to be meaningful to both of you, to you and to your spouse, and start to make plans to do what you can for as long as you can, because it's not like you've been given an immediate death sentence. It's hard to have these conversations because until now, if we're going to be absolutely honest with folks, we don't have a cure for this disease. So when you get the diagnosis, it's not like we can say, if you take this pill, it will get better. But there is so much, as Sue has already started to suggest, that you can do to maximize the function of your brain and keep things going for much longer than people actually start to think about. And things that are meaningful and interesting and things that the two of you want to do together are going to be the most important things to engage in for as long as you can, while at the same time starting to think about what happens when your spouse, for example, starts to change, and having some of those conversations around, if there comes a point where you're not able to do things together, then what are the alternatives that would still be of interest and meaningful, and how do the two of you take this journey together? What would you guys add to that?
I don't think I would add anything.
I think I would just add something on the spouse's side, which is that though caregiving can be a very meaningful journey, very rewarding, at times people can feel taxed by the load. And so it's important to practice good self-care for the spouse that is healthy. And it's important to be able to seek help when you need it in terms of your own level of mood and anxiety. So really, self-care is selfless. Oftentimes, people who are in a caregiving role feel that they don't have the time, or they shouldn't take time for themselves, or that they feel stigmatized by the illness that their spouse has. But from what we see every day, the earlier you get that intervention, so if you're not feeling like yourself and your mood and anxiety is getting worse, then it's good to get that checkup from the neck up, as Susan mentioned earlier, to see a primary healthcare professional to begin with, or a mental health professional, and to find out kind of where you stand to make sure that you're able to fulfill your caregiving role, but more importantly, to enjoy the time that you have together.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You have to remember that if you don't look after yourself, you're no good to anybody else. Oh, another question coming in. You're the moderator.
Okay, I'm the moderator. I'm the question reader, apparently. Can you talk about the importance of work and having meaningful work as we age?
Do you want to talk about meaningful occupation?
It's interesting that you use the word work, because Nesreen just quietly said meaningful occupation, again, as an occupational therapist. But working with older adults for most of my career, I spend a lot of time saying that I'm not about getting you another job, because I know you've retired, but the idea that you have something meaningful to do pretty much every day is in my opinion, as a professional, really one of the key components of good overall health and well-being. But and if you think about it, there are so many, you know, phrases and idioms and expressions that people have used over time. Idle hands at the devil's workshop comes to mind initially. We need to be busy, we need to be engaged, and we need to be able to feel that we're productive. And with aging, that can be hard. And if we want to talk about the implications of a decline in brain function on work, I would be lying if I said that you don't run a risk. For example, if you're an accountant and you get a diagnosis of dementia, one of the first signs might have been the difficulty with numbers, something that you always excelled at. It doesn't mean that you can no longer contribute in some way because you've suddenly been given this diagnosis, but maybe your previous job needs to be adapted. Maybe there are other things that you can do to help keep yourself feeling like you're contributing, while making accommodations for some of the things that you're noticing that are changing. If you work construction and you start to decline physically, you reach a point where you can no longer do that kind of physical construction work. But it doesn't mean that you don't still contribute to a home renovation or cleaning out the garage. And I'm thinking of my own personal experience for that. Again, it's very individualized. And I think that's a really important message through all of this. It's not like there is a recipe and everyone who experiences X must do Y. It has to be individualized because it has to be what's meaningful and important for each one of us. And that's going to look different for each one of us. How would you add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that the important thing is not the paid work. So I'm going to kind of move away from that and talk a little bit about retirement or semi-retirement. I think that people need to plan. Oftentimes the big focus on retirement is financial planning, but we also need to do social planning and activity planning. And so we feel that we're contributing while we're doing something enjoyable and interesting to ourselves. And as well, I think the takeaway here is that you can retire from your job, but not from life. So it's important to keep going through volunteerism, through mentoring, through being able to share what you've learned and the richness of your life with others who have the same experience as you and people who are new to your life. One of the things people suggest is having friends of different ages, people who are your age, people who are younger, people who are older, who can kind of help us along that journey.
Mm-hmm. That connection, those relationships, so important. Go ahead.
I'll read it.
I see a word in quotes that I like.
Okay, I'll do air quotes. Can you talk about the impact of being portrayed as elderly, that's in quotes, or feeble, even if we are active and robust?
Oh, so I'm not sure if that's a reference to this idea. I'll use the word ageism, the idea that if you are of a certain age, you therefore must be feeble. I don't believe in it at all, and neither should you. I do know that sometimes, you know, older adults can be their own worst enemies. I tend to do a lot of work around the issue of intimacy with aging. And one of the things that we found over time is because older adults have been told all along that you're going to reach a point where you certainly wouldn't want to have sex anymore, would you? That they start to actually think that, well, maybe I wouldn't. You know, you lose a partner, you have a significant loss, and your kids are horrified at the thought that you would, you know, move on and look for another kind of a relationship. That's all part of that idea that once you get to a certain age, you just can't do it anymore. I would hope that as we see the numbers of older adults increasing throughout society, that they are an example of what aging can be, and that idea that old Du Maurier, I think, commercial, you're not getting older, you're getting better, is absolutely true. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to underline something that Susan said earlier in her presentation that people are actually happier as they get older. So all things being equal, I'm going to be happier when I'm 70 than I am today, but I'm having a good day. And so this is the spirit in which we want to age. But you can't really blame people, can you, for having ageist attitudes that they internalize, so ageism about themselves, because the only thing that the media really shows us about aging is how to prevent it, not about how to do it well.
Yes.
So I think it's up to each of us to be able to have these kind of open conversations, whether it be about sexuality or whether it be about work or anything else, that tells us that we're still vibrant and shows us the way to do it. So I think that's important.
Absolutely.
Interesting question. So are there any movies that realistically portray what a person could expect with dementia? Movies. That's a stumper for me. One of the reasons it's a stumper for me is because although I think we share a lot of clinical expertise of what dementia looks like from the outside, we don't have the insider's view.
True.
So I hesitate to sort of endorse something enthusiastically.
What comes to your mind?
I know a couple of films that actually portray it, which is Away from Her.
That was the one that came to my mind.
Sarah Polley, and also Still Alice, which I know that other organizations I've worked with in terms of aging do endorse. So those are two titles that I'm comfortable sharing.
And both of those came to my mind as well. But
me too.
But
I would like to watch them again when I have dementia and critique them. If and when.
I mean, I think that speaks to the point that it's a very individual experience like anything else. So don't be surprised if you don't see yourself or a loved one in it, but at least they're approaching that topic now in a serious way.
Yeah, that would be very true. That's a common one, I think.
Yeah. I have a history of dementia in my family. Does this mean I'm going to have dementia too? The short answer is, if I may, probably no, not necessarily. So having a family history of dementia does sort of put a bit of risk on the risk pile for a person. But as I said in my presentation, age is the majority of risk. So as we get older, it's the aging that's sort of driving the biggest element of risk. So just to give some numbers to that, among persons over 85, about 35% of the population may be impacted by dementia. That's still a minority, and that's still a lot less than most people think. And if you look at the population from 65 plus, it's much lower. Some estimates as low as 1%, but around 5 is sort of a common number. So age is the biggest risk factor for dementia. If you have a family history of dementia that has impacted a family member at a later age, that adds maybe this much risk to the picture. In rare cases, there are certain types of dementia that are more specifically genetic, and those are much more isolated, and they tend to affect persons at very young ages. So if you have a history of dementia that began in middle age in a family member, that would be something to talk to your doctor about.
I would just like to talk a little bit about the modifiable lifestyle factors that we can do to prevent dementia or to kind of stave it off. And Susan had actually mentioned them earlier, but I want to sort of make short work of that and talk about three things. One is if you smoke, quit. The second is if you don't exercise, start. And the third one is make sure that if you're experiencing mental health problems like depression or anxiety in midlife, that you have them assessed and treated, because an untreated history of anxiety or depression in midlife doubles the risk of developing dementia later on. And we know that depression and anxiety are eminently treatable. And currently, as we've already discussed, dementia has no cure.
Excellent, agreed. And again, if there's an element of stigma that's making you hesitate to try and seek some help for that midlife mood change or the anxiety, get past it and get the help. There's a lot of stigma still attached to dementia and other mental health issues. Here's a good one for you, Sue.
I will read, and I am not aware of any science on this point. Is there any proof that a full moon can make a person's dementia worse? I have no knowledge.
No,
of this, and
although, have I heard it said? Yes.
You've heard it said? I haven't even heard it said.
I have, yeah. A previous place that I worked, staff were pretty sure they could tell when a full moon was coming based on the behaviors of the patients on the unit.
Huh.
Yeah, but
As far as I know, there's no scientific evidence.
Nope. So get out there and howl at the moon.
What 3 things should I be doing every day to age healthfully? Nazreen, want to recap?
You just gave us those 3 things. So easy, you cannot forget them.
Right. So let me answer it in a different way. I think let's cover some myths.
Yeah.
Okay. So we know that dementia is not a normal part of aging. So if you're having any concerns about your cognition, see your doctor. We know that depression is not a normal part of aging. So if you're having problems with your mood or anxiety, make sure you get that checked out. But I think if you don't remember anything else from today's presentations, the one thing you can do that actually grows the part of your brain involved in mood and memory at any age is exercise. So exercise that makes you sweat actually creates neurogenesis or grows new cells in the part of the brain that we need for healthy mood and improved memory and concentration. So every little bit helps. These studies are usually based on, at least 3 times a week of cardiovascular exercise. But the important thing is to make sure that you get a checkup by your doctor before you start any exercise regime. But after that, on the doctor's advice, being in nature, taking a walk, playing light sports, any of those things are really, really helpful in terms of increasing your everyday health and in healthy aging. And lastly, I would say relationships, which actually just become more and more important, don't they, as we age. And so those are the kind of everyday things. One last thing is sleep disruption is also not a normal part of aging. Nobody should ever put up with sleep problems and put it down to getting older. Because I see this like weekly. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important that what's good sleep? You should be sleeping more than 6 hours a night and less than 10. So an average of 8 hours of sleep a night, but things vary. And also you should wake up in the morning feeling refreshed and rested. And if you're not, you should see your doctor.
Excellent. Great advice. Mm-hmm.
Here. All right. Any tips for helping family members realize what a loved one with dementia may be, rather than just knowing about dementia? Team folks, do I have this grammatically?
Just getting a little bit of clarification on that question. Keep those cards and letters coming in, folks.
Thank you. Oh. Got it. Any tips for helping family members realize at what stage a loved one with dementia may be, rather than just knowing about dementia? So if I'm to reframe, I guess it's a question around understanding where in a progression a person may be falling. Yeah. Do you want to talk? Yeah, please. You're so good at talking.
So I'll be honest, I have a little bit of hesitation when I hear people wanting to stage the illness, because I find that it sets up for some a level of expectation that, again, may not apply to your individual case. While it's true that it does progress, and the Alzheimer's Society usually will spell out broad parameters for what happens in early, middle, and late stage dementia. In terms of knowing whether someone is in an early stage versus a middle or a late, I mean, certainly the general deterioration of the entire person is the trajectory that we go from in the early stages through to the late stages. Just because you can't remember where you put your card keys doesn't mean that you have dementia. Although those kinds of small mental slips, memory lapses, do tend to, occur more commonly in the early stages. But again, it depends on also the specific type of dementia that you have. There is at least one definitive diagnostic type of dementia, frontotemporal, that tends to progress without early memory changes. So again, it's a little bit hard to pigeonhole everyone into, you're going to be given a 10-year course. The first 2 years, you will have some memory problems, but otherwise be fully functional. And then from year 2 through to year 8, you will discover that you are forgetting who people are and forgetting where you are. And the final 2 stages, you're bedbound. I have heard that kind of a descriptor used, and that is not the typical pattern that everyone follows. I would appreciate you guys weighing in for some more on that.
I mean, I think what I would suggest is one of the kind of advances of geriatrics over other areas of healthcare is that we tend to have a lot more family involvement because of the fact that the index client or patient may not be able to answer all of the questions or be able to be a reliable historian. So I think the positive side of that is to ask to see the doctor with the family member, and if you're comfortable and having maybe more than one family member, but not so many that it's overwhelming for the person who has the cognitive impairment or stigmatizing for them. And the reason I say that is then you can get the information from the source about the case that your loved one is actually experiencing or the family member is experiencing, and let them be your guide and get all your questions answered.
The only thing I would say is, with Sylvia's note of caution, that this is not everybody's plan. The Alzheimer's Society of Canada or the Alzheimer's Association of the USA, they both have very nice comprehensive resources for what to expect, that kind of thing, just to give some larger parameters to what may be in the path. And of course, each individual's path may look very different.
Oh, a couple more coming in. Take this one.
All right. Tips for helping siblings who live far away to stay connected if a parent can't use the phone. Good question.
Go to webinar.
Go to webinar. In all seriousness, FaceTime and such can work for some people.
And also sending something through the mail in terms of photographs, artwork, cards, things that the individual can hold on to and look at. And they may or may not completely identify it with you, but it's a way of sharing something, or something that they enjoy, like sending or having somebody who is closer to them play some music, or show them an art or a movie that is something you used to do together.
Also, the idea that maybe you send, maybe you've got old photos from your childhood, things like that, sending them perhaps with some like labels, Dad and Timmy, those sorts of things. That can actually be very helpful. First off, if the person with dementia receives that, it's possible that, and this can be very distressing for everyone, that they might not necessarily immediately recognize the people in the photos, so a little bit of a label can be helpful, but that can also make those photographs an amazing tool that anyone who stops by to visit with your family member can use to try, because people don't know how to talk to the person, how to engage with the person. And having a photo album with some labels that allows them to sit together and go through the pictures, those kinds of things can be tremendously meaningful for the person, and also help them feel connected with you again, even though you're far away. I would say that one thing I've noticed is sometimes the younger generation, if you want to call them that, depends heavily on technology, and technology can do amazing things to keep us connected in this day and age. Sometimes a parent or a grandparent, even though they might have been embracing it in later years, as the disease progresses, they might start to lose the ability to really re-engage at that technological level. So don't be disappointed if all of a sudden the Skyping or the FaceTime doesn't really work because it seems to be a little bit distressing for them. And there's lots of different ways to kind of work through that. They need time to kind of figure out again what it means and how to do it. So I just caution that. And that's why I actually like the idea of, going back to old school and snail mail and photos and books, because that can actually really help center the person. Didn't even see that one come in.
All right. Are there any mineral supplements or foods that are good for brain health? Is that me?
Yes.
That's me. Bottom line is a healthy, well-balanced diet is the best thing you can eat for your brain health.
Isn't that what you wanted to hear?
Sorry. You have to exercise. You have to get good sleep. All the boring things you already know, I'm afraid we're going to endorse wholeheartedly.
And eat blueberries. Oh, go on.
Come on.
Sorry, I'm kidding.
So again, it's the balance. It's not there's no one superfood. There's no one super herbal remedy that's been shown to have benefits at all to memory and thinking or to reducing risk of dementia. So it's really about a healthy, well-balanced diet. Now, there's some research, a fair amount of research on the Mediterranean style diet as one that's sort of low in the red meats, higher in the fish and the good healthy oils or whatnot. Includes a glass of red wine a day, to say that that's an example of a very balanced diet that does seem to confer some benefits to brain health in later ages. But to me, and my understanding of the nutritional experts that I work closely with, I think of that as an example of a healthy diet. It's not the only one. So Canada's Food Guide has recently been revamped, nicely aligned with what the teaching is around the brain health and eating. There's also a Baycrest-based publication called the Brain Health Food Guide that probably a Google click away, that breaks it down more specifically in terms of how to make a balanced diet for brain health.
And there's also a brain health cookbook.
Oh yeah, it comes.
Called
There's
Mindful.
a Mindful, yes. So if you're looking for inspiration, which I always am.
Here's a good one.
Okay. I know it's bad to be socially lonely, but I'm shy and don't have many friends close by. What can I do to change this while still being true to my introversion? So as an introvert sitting on a webcam, I'm with you. Over to my colleagues who like to talk with people.
Well, first I want to talk a little bit about loneliness. And I think that this has become sort of like the last taboo, that people are sort of willing to talk about almost anything but this. So it's really brave for the person who came up with this question. It is very important to be socially connected, but there's two aspects. I mean, loneliness is really an emotion where you feel that you want a closeness or connection that you don't have, which is not the same thing as being isolated, right? But both things are actually not good for our health. So we know that loneliness is actually as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it has the same impact on your mortality, or your likeliness to die, your morbidity or your physical health status, and your mental health and your cognitive health. So I would say here that, using first technology to the good, so staying connected with individuals, which doesn't mean looking at status updates on Facebook and things, but using those kinds of tools, which are really neutral, neither good nor bad, to connect in person with people, to do what you feel comfortable with. So it could be just a coffee or a tea or a shorter interaction with somebody. And also you should try and remember that even though people have hundreds of friends on social media and things, what we need is a deep and meaningful connection, especially as we age, because we have so much more to share. We become so much more, I don't want to say idiosyncratic, but more specific. Let's put it that way. More interesting. So one of the reasons that older people have less friends is because they choose to. They are much more selective in who they want to spend time with. Mm-hmm. And so what I would say is to maybe take a small first step, to call someone you already know and maybe haven't seen in a while or would like to see. So that's something. I think another thing is to think about where you might meet other people, whether it's some kind of matching website or a volunteer club or something like that, where you're in the company of others who are like-minded that you feel comfortable with. And you can kind of be the quiet one, and it's not always one-on-one. I think that those things are important, and also taking stock and being grateful for the relationships that you do have, and kind of giving yourself some confidence by being compassionate and thinking about the ways in which you've been able to master this in your life, because you didn't, obviously you were an introvert all along. Mm-hmm. And so what were the ways in which you were able to meet people before and have meaningful relationships that you maintained? I will also say this, that one of the things, it's true of men also, but more studies have been done on women, and friendship is that actually becomes key as they get older, especially because women still tend to marry people who are older than them, mm-hmm. and so are often put in a caregiving role so that they're not in a spousal relationship, let's put it that way, either because of death, because of caregiving, so the relationship changes, it's not completely spousal, because people don't marry or whatever the changing demographics. So friendship is where a lot of the action is socially for us as we age, because we're living so much longer, and we will need even to make new friends as we age. So I know you are shy, but don't be shy to think that everyone else has this incredibly rich social network that they've been developing for 50, 60 years. That's often not the case, because people change jobs, change cities, and we live a more kind of, not rootless completely life, but definitely more dislocated, and due to immigration. Mm-hmm. So you're not alone in feeling lonely, and you're not alone in going through this challenge, but I hope some of those tips work.
Mm-hmm. And I would add that it's not as you've already alluded to, it's not the quantity of relationships, it's the quality, and one or two close friendships can make all the difference. And if you really can't face that hurdle of trying to get out there and meet new friends, think of something that you're already interested in or that's meaningful for you, and see if there's a way to dip your toe in that lake a little bit and see who else is out there with a similar interest. Or you mentioned volunteer clubs. Maybe you want to offer your skills in some volunteer capacity to a local community group, a local agency. I mean, the possibilities for trying to have a little bit of increased connection and relationships without really completely bearing your soul to the world, if it's not who you've been all your life, those kinds of things might be the things that you want to think about, because nobody's saying you have to change who you've been all your life just because now you've been told that you got to be socially connected in order to stay healthy. There are still ways to have those relationships. It's really important that you ask that question. Another one.
Okay. Mm-hmm. How intense should my regular exercise be as I get older?
You're the one who mentioned sweating.
Yeah.
You have to sweat.
So here's the thing, is as we sit here, scientists are busily trying to find out what is the lowest level that exercise can be titrated to be effective.
Please tell me what it is.
But the way science works is that we usually do what we call proof of principle. So we want to know that under ideal circumstances would this even be effective, and that's where we are at this point, which shows that exercise that makes you sweat for about 20 minutes to a half an hour, at least 3 times a week, is what is going to save your brain essentially, and give you a good physical health and mood. However, I can't sort of emphasize enough how many times in life people's exercise programs are disrupted because they have children, because of work, because of moving, because of anything. And so it's important to do what you can where you are, whether it's a little bit of stretching, deep breathing, walking around the block, being in nature. All of these kinds of things are really, really important. So just do what comes naturally, do what you like, whether it's a sport or bird watching or whatever it is that kind of gets you out and about. Anything is better than nothing. And even if you do a low impact kind of physical regime that you enjoy, you're going to be more likely to stick to it. And so that's kind of the bottom line, is just move.
Just move. Mm-hmm.
Let's sit here longer.
Yes.
Is dementia curable?
Go ahead.
So dementia is a term that captures a number of different, can capture a number of different diseases. So dementia is an umbrella term. It means that a person is experiencing memory and thinking changes or behavioral changes that have reached a level of severity where they can't take care of themselves anymore. So that's really just a description. It's kind of like saying, or like observing, you know, that person has a limp. It doesn't say why they have a limp. They just have a limp. They just have dementia. So dementia can be caused by many different diseases. So the majority of persons with dementia tend to be suffering from Alzheimer's disease underneath as the cause of the dementia. Alzheimer's disease is not curable. The majority of the other common causes of dementia are not curable. There are a small subset of persons who come to their doctor with serious memory thinking changes, and at this level where they might make a diagnosis of dementia, where there is something medically wrong that can be treated, or something, maybe a psychiatric condition that can be treated. There's a small subset of people who present with what looks like a dementia and is then found not to be, or managed or addressed. So again, sort of our bottom line here is if you have concerns about yourself or loved one, always talk to your doctor first and foremost. You know, if you're of the mindset that I know what's happening and this is what's going to be and here's where it's going, I don't need my doctor, I would strongly encourage you to back away from that. There is hope, and there is a lot you can do at any stage of any disease to optimize your brain health, to optimize your experience, to take control and live well, even with dementia.
Definitely. Yes.
Is drinking alcohol good or bad for health? I hear conflicting information from the news. And there was talk before the webinar that some of our team here don't want to know the answer to this question. We want to take,
Let's go back to the Mediterranean diet again.
Let's go back to the Mediterranean diet. In all seriousness, there's at least a hint of data out of the Mediterranean diet research that lifestyle and that diet that does indeed include a glass of red wine about a day is fine and perhaps good for you. Just a hint of literature there. Certainly alcohol to excess and chronic heavy alcohol use is very bad for health and very bad for brain health. But you know, I think a bottom line message here today is all things in moderation.
Yes.
Perhaps including moderation. It is as far as is what we know at this present about alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be it. Here.
All right. How can I know the difference between, I'll use my air quotes again, regular aging and the beginnings of dementia? I feel like this one's for me again. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to keep talking. So what is regular aging is a question I'd love to unpack, but
yeah.
If I think just about the memory changes, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that some degree of memory change is a normal part of aging. And as we've mentioned in a couple different ways, memory change is often an initial symptom of diseases that cause dementia. So when we misplace our car keys, when we can't find our glasses, when we can't find our cell phones, it's quite now normal to react with, oh my goodness, this must be dementia. There are lots of different ways to answer this, but one thing to know about the difference between normal aging and dementia is that it has to do with the impact of the memory change. So, for example, not to use myself as the paragon of health, but I spent 15 minutes looking for my car keys this morning. And I still made it to work, and here I am at this webinar, and I said a few curse words, but life went on, and I knew they were in one of 12 places, and I got to them eventually, that kind of thing. So if memory changes are a source of annoyance and frustration, but don't interfere with your day-to-day effective living at a certain level, then that's more a characteristic of normal aging. There's a lot you can do to minimize those changes. That's enough story.
Yeah,
Anything to add?
I would just add that statistically, the #1 brain health problem over the age of 40 is actually depression. It's not dementia, and that's the good news, because depression is so eminently treatable. And I just want to talk a little bit about what the distinction there is. So the #1 differential diagnosis question I get is this depression or dementia? And I will say that most people come to me because they're concerned that they have cognitive problems, not that they have a mental health problem. And when somebody comes in and they're, ruminative, very self-critical, and I ask them, well, what are the things that you're forgetting? As Susan mentioned about, misplacing the keys this morning, I'll get, just a list as long as my arm of all the things they've forgotten in the last couple of weeks. And then I have a pretty clear sense that they don't have dementia or cognitive impairment, and they likely have depression because they're down on themselves, because they're counting these things obsessively, because they're ruminative. And so I'm not making light of mood disorders. I'm merely saying that for everyone out there, I think the message today really is one of hope, is that the kind of brain health problems y'all may even be having are actually ones that are very, very clearly treatable at this point. And so what we would all encourage you to do is to step out of your comfort zone if you need to, and as Sylvia mentioned very clearly, and just do the courageous thing and talk to your doctor to make sure of where you stand, and chances are you'll just be relieved more than anything.
That's actually a really excellent segue into the last question, folks.
Great, last
I'm
question.
going to read it.
Oh, okay. Wait, take away my jam. Go ahead.
What is the difference between depression and anxiety and mental health?
That's right. There you go.
So, so depression, what your doctor is looking for when they're assessing depression is the following. Depression is actually a triad of constellation of symptoms. So the first is the stereotypical low mood. So feeling blue, feeling low, feeling lonely, this kind of thing. Most of the day, nearly every day for 2 weeks or more. The second kind of constellation of symptoms is physical, so sleep, appetite, and energy changes. And the last one is actually cognitive. So this is why there's a lot of mix up around depression, dementia as we age, because as we age, depression has a more cognitive edge. So what usually drives people into treatment is actually the cognitive symptoms of not being able to attend, to concentrate, to have good social skills, to have good judgment, things like that. So that's what clinical depression is. It's not just low mood. So that's what your symptoms are being assessed on. Whereas the most kind of, I don't say popular, but the most likely anxiety disorder is actually generalized anxiety disorder, which means that you have excessive anxiety in the last half a year or so, which actually affects your physical health and your ability to function. So one thing to remember is that all mental disorders are just two things. It's subjective distress, like low mood or excessive nervousness and worry, and they impact your functioning in 2 or more areas. So everyone is nervous at times and anxious at times. But what happens is once the trigger is removed, so for example, if the door to our webinar room slammed suddenly, all of our cortisol would go up right now, and our heart rate would go up and our blood pressure would go up. But what differentiates someone who has an anxiety disorder from someone who just felt anxious momentarily is that that person's anxiety will go back to baseline within a few minutes for sure. In people who have generalized anxiety disorder, their anxiety is dysfunctional. So it's sort of like the part of the brain, the amygdala, which is like the panic button, and it's just being pushed all the time, even when there's no threat in the environment. So we have very good treatments like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a evidence-based talk therapy, which is now the gold standard treatment for depression and anxiety through the lifespan, which helps us work with clients to turn maladaptive patterns of thinking into adaptive patterns of thinking. So one of the focus that we have here at Baycrest and at Rotman is how our thinking changes, right? Well, thinking also changes in mental health disorders. And so once we get a handle on that and change it around, it can clarify our thinking and also help us with our mood and our anxiety.
And the last thing that I would add, I think it's interesting that we're having the conversation today about things like depression and mood at the same time that we're talking about dementia. Because too often in my practice, I've encountered kind of an assumption that if someone has dementia, then there is no hope. And therefore, what do we care about whether we might be noticing a change in things that would suggest that even though they're on a slow progression of decline associated with dementia, is it possible that they now are showing symptoms of depression or an anxiety disorder that can be treated? We don't give up on the person because they have dementia, because as you've said, that depression can be treated, and then you can elevate the person's mood again. And yes, they're still on the slow progression associated with the diagnosis of dementia, but you lift their mood and now their quality of life improves.
That's
and
right.
It's really important to always consider
Both sides
that.
and the overall well-being of the person.
Okay, so that was our last question. I'm going to reach up to you and just put it on a slide really quickly to say that this is our, to remind people that, to thank people for coming today, and thank you for your questions. They were great questions, and as an introvert, I deeply enjoyed connecting with you and talking about this, and thank you to Sylvia and Nazreen. I've learned a lot today, and I hope you all have too. So as it says on the slide, just know that these slides will be made available for all attendees, and this was generously sponsored by CABHI, and CABHI's got more information and an email address to contact if you'd like. Oh, and sorry, one more thing to say, that if you'd like a recording of the webinar, participants today may also have access to that through the CABHI team. So, all right, thanks you very
folks.
much, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Be healthy.